The fourth productive change strategy is the global sourcing of inputs. So we're sort of moving now to focusing on the future, but instead of what product we make and how we sell it, we're sort of looking more at how and where do we make it. So we're going to move over to this category here. And the first one is global sourcing of inputs. So what is that? That is where the business purchases its inputs from other businesses in other countries. It then uses these inputs in the operation system to produce the output itself in Australia. It's a very complicated description, but just go back a few topics. What was the operation system? That was where we had inputs, the resources used to produce the final output. They got turned into transformation, the processes involved in converting the inputs into the final output. And lastly, we were left with outputs, the transformed inputs or final product, which is either a good or a service. And what we're talking about here is that we still keep the operation system in Australia, so it's still here. We're just talking about the inputs. So if we took an Australian business like Darrell Eat Chocolate, for example, we could say we're still going to make that product here. We're just going to get some of the inputs from overseas. So, for example, we might get the sugar from China. We might get the web design done for the business from India. And it doesn't have to be good. So you can see we're importing a service here, which is an input as well. And maybe we get the milk from France. The point is we're getting all these inputs and still some inputs from Australia, and we are turning them into an output in Australia. So we're going to end up with a Rockley Road block of chocolate based on inputs from many places outside of Australia. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of this? Well, the advantages are we're going to have lower costs. One of the reasons we get inputs from overseas is they generally are cheaper than can be provided by Australian suppliers. Now, if we've got lower input prices, that means we can charge lower prices to consumers. We can pass that on. That'll help us get market share. And we still maintain an Australian operation. So we've got all our infrastructure in place in Australia, our factories, our logistics, our people. We're just getting the inputs from somewhere else. What is bad about that strategy? Well, we've got to find overseas suppliers that are not only cost effective, but also reliable in terms of product quality and customer service. It's very difficult to find a supplier overseas, one, but two, how do you know whether they're good? What are you going to base that on? There's no one you can ask. Like in Australia, you probably know other businesses and other people, but who do you ask? You have no idea sometimes. So it is also hard to establish a reliable infrastructure. Just because we've got a reliable supplier of, say, milk from France, how do we get that to Australia? That's going to cost a lot of money. That's got to come by a ship, and ships cost money, and then it's got to get to the port and get put from on a train to wherever we are, for example. So very complicated. Now we also open ourselves up to the floating of exchange rates. They're up and down, so we might have Australian dollars, but we might need to buy euros or yuan or rupees, and then we've also got tariffs at the border, the taxes that the government places on things coming into Australia. So they're going to increase our costs. And lastly, probably the biggest one is the cultural and language barriers. All those three countries we just used as an example, none of which is English as the main official language. So that makes it difficult. But also little things. Think about time zone differences. If we've got a complaint or an issue that we need to deal with in Australia between business hours 9 to 5, well, on the other side of the world in France, for example, it's the middle of the night. So how do you deal with that? So that adds another layer of complexity to it.